I love the way you said that in some sense finance is laboratory of consciousness and they're trying to seek truth in a certain manner. Um, I believe that you would also agree that in doing so, there is some sort of reification of some truth, but the leaving out of other possibilities of the truth. Because then you make certain things or certain parameters as more important. You give them currency, and you want everybody to follow that, and that sort of leaves out other possibilities in to pursue. Um, and I think that pretty much happened when perhaps when George Soros released the book and he was trying to perhaps contextualize his existence, his worldview. People thought that they should shed that thing called the fat of anything which is philosophy, but get down to practical money making kind of thing. So would you believe that in some sense when we run these financial institutions, we reify a certain kind of truth and then leave out the possibilities of discoveries of other form of truth?
So yeah, I mean, with finance, I kind of say it was a step a step in my path of understanding something about the human mind. But not for a moment would I say, if you wanted to become a Buddhist priest, then you should go and join Goldman Sachs. That was just my path,
That's a
and
great headline. That's a great headline.
yeah, well, but I'm convinced. I'm convinced if I just went and studied philosophy at school, I wouldn't have got it. But because I went into that and my mentors taught me to use finance as a laboratory of consciousness, when I came out of the other end and I had this moment of deep pain in my life where I just felt my life was meaningless, although it wasn't. It was just, again, it was the heart kicking in a big way, saying it's time to move on, Benjamin. You've done the finance career. You learned from it. Now let's move on. It's time for the inner poet to rear his ugly head again. I remember going on a vision quest at one point when I was transitioning, and this inner voice kind of said, "Benjamin, you are a poet masquerading as a banker for the last decade. So now it's time to embrace your inner poet again." And I like to think, there's always a marriage between the analytical mind and the creative mind. Yeah, of course, in finance, people are trying to seek truth in their world, and their world is bigger than many people's worlds, and it's a great place to train the mind. And if I'd had studied a PhD in if I had studied a PhD in philosophy, I'm absolutely convinced I would not have been able to pick up the Tao Te Ching in about 2012 and read it from cover to cover and understood it from the heart with no interpretation, which I love in the Dead Poets Society, the film. It's like one of my all-time favorite movies. There's so many memorable moments, but I love the moment where he's trying to teach poetry to the class, and he tells everyone to rip out the introduction. He's like, do not read some academics. And I don't want to bash on academics too much today, because there's some amazing academics, but he's like, do not rely on someone else's interpretation. You basically, you must connect to the poetry directly. And I that's what happened with me and the Tao. I'd never read anyone else's interpretation. I read it cover to cover, and I was so inspired, and I was crying of in joy that the deeper truth that was coming through my Zen practice and Zen meditation was confirmed in this ancient text, and it was so subversive. It was not, going back to my dear housemaster, Mr. Fawkes. The greatest spiritual teachers and the greatest philosophers and sages of antiquity are or were subversive because they go against the general grain of society. Like Jesus, like getting upset with the money merchants and knocking over all the stalls, or whoever. I mean, I remember just last year I was at a conference where we were trying to introduce a futures program to a German university, and they brought me in to speak. They also brought in one of the top AI researchers at Stanford University, and he'd done a course on Chuang Tzu, who was one of Lao Tzu's successors, and he'd studied it, and he said to me, American chap, smart, very smart guy, he said, I studied it, it was amazing, but he said in American society today, that would be impossible, absolutely impossible to live by the way of Chuang Tzu. And I disagree. I humbly disagree, but it requires a high level of non-conformity, which for me is a massive theme in my life. It is about non-conformity. We all, great example of conformity is the fact that I thought to be smart and be socially accepted, I had to become a lawyer or a doctor. There was nowhere in my mind where I thought, oh, maybe I should become a poet or a futurist. To me, becoming a futurist is my way of becoming totally conformist.
Yeah. So I just to tie it back to the question that we were trying to discover on is uh, is finance a certain seeking of truth, reifying certain kind of truth, and then leaving out possibilities of discovery of other truth. What I hear you say is that could be a possibility, because when you do that, when you do the earlier, you tend to create conformities. You tend to create and follow other people's interpretations. Uh, there's some form of standardization that is wielded in the society in some way. Would you agree with that as a construct?
Yeah, I mean, I think going into the laboratory of finance is not going. If you want to know the meaning of life, it might not immediately help you. But what does help you is cultivating a flexibility of mind, and an openness to new ideas, and the letting go of paradigms. Because like one of my early mentors said to me, Benjamin, you have to make a decision in your finance career. Do you want to be right, or do you want to have performance? Do you want to make money for your clients? And if you're attached to your belief system, even if new evidence comes along, you won't change your mind. And this is what's happening globally at the moment. People are stuck in their tribal units with tribal views. And, if you're I have loads of friends in California. I love them dearly. But if Trump ever did anything that was good from a policy perspective, they still wouldn't see it. And there may be the opposite. There might be people living in mid America who, when because personally I think Trump has done actually some good things, but when he announced that the record-breaking military budget in his first year in office, I wouldn't say that's so good. That the world doesn't need more military arms and more weapons and more war, and how many supporters, Republican supporters or supporters of Trump were able to discern, oh, maybe that's not good.
Yeah.
So we've just become very tribal and very much thinking in paradigms. So for me, the path, well, something that finance taught me was not to be attached to dogma, but Zen actually gave me a real, I guess, methodology to really dig myself out of that, like to give me some tools to to accelerate that process. And it's interesting now, finally you're seeing some of the best investors in the world admit that meditation's a key part of their process, like Ray Dalio.
Absolutely. Who Bridgewater.
Bridgewater. I've known about him for a decade, well before he sort of became more famous, before he started publishing books, because I recognized a kindred spirit that was able to, someone said the definition of intelligence has been able to understand paradox, to be able to hold two seemingly contradictory opinions in your mind at any one given moment of time. And Eastern philosophy has gifted me with that this black and white thinking is really not so useful. And I say it's Eastern, but it's in a way it's just deeper wisdom, deeper philosophy, because you go back into the history of the West and we were not so dualistic. So you take Shakespeare. So Shakespeare, the reason we don't understand Shakespeare at school is because it's so profound that our teachers don't understand it, and we're certainly not going to understand it. And it's like the blind leading the blind. I mean, the talk is that Shakespeare didn't actually write Shakespeare. It was actually Sir Francis Bacon, who was a Rosicrucian, a mystic, multi-talented man. And I think he was a lawyer, scientist, all sorts, but a real polymath. And there's he had access to some of the ancient Western, let's say, wisdom traditions that go all the way back to Egypt. And there's a lot of profundity in the Shakespearean text. But there was one quote that there's no such thing as black and white, only the mind maketh it so. So that's pretty much Buddhist, maybe Hindu, maybe the Greek. Many of the Greek philosophers would get that. The shaman of the indigenous tribes around the world would certainly get that. It points to a timeless